been running for a little over a year. And well, the format tonight will be, I'll introduce each reader. Each reader is going to read for around 5 to 10 minutes-ish. And while they're reading, if you all want to react or ask questions, you can do so in your chat bar of the screen. And after the reading, we'll have a chance for the writers, the 4 writers, to address those questions. Or if you have questions about the revision intensive or about Writers in Progress in general, Emily and I are happy to field those. Someone just asked if it's possible to turn on closed captions. I don't know how to do that. Does anyone know how to do that? We'll work on it. In the meantime, yeah, so without too much further ado, Writers in Progress has been going since 1992. It's been a great run. It just keeps getting bigger and better. And a lot of that is thanks to my fantastic assistant director, Emily Lackey, who is the leader of this revision intensive, which was her baby. She invented it, and it's been a huge success, and people rave about the work that they get done. I have yet to take it, but I really want to do the next one. So I actually was going to sign up for this one, and then it sold out in about 2 seconds. So Emily, would you mind just saying a few words about the revision intensive and what writers are doing in there and the work that you all do together before we read?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just a little distracted because I am trying to figure out how to do closed captioning. So hopefully we'll get that up and running in just a minute. Yes, the revision intensive. I'm so excited for this reading tonight, in part because I got a sneak peek of it on Tuesday, so I know it's a really fabulous one, but also because it's a real celebration for the members of our revision intensive who come together 2 times a month, the 2nd and 4th Sunday of every month in the morning. We come together online, of course. And it's really a wonderful combination of so many of the different types of workshops that we offer at Writers in Progress. So there are 4 real components to it. The first of which I think is the most important, and hopefully the other readers tonight agree, is really a support element. So the way that each workshop starts is that we come together and check in and talk about what are the struggles that we're facing, what are the successes that we've had. And then every time we meet, we also go over craft topics and strategies for seeing our work anew, which is really the toughest part about revision, being able to see it, to see our work clearly, to see it, to provide some distance and objectivity between ourselves and the work that we've created, to switch from writer into editor mode. And then we have a nice long chunk of time where we actually dig into the work together individually. And then we come together and set goals for the weeks ahead. So it really is a fabulous support system. I was a part of the group with my own book. And as someone who absolutely dreaded revision, had real sort of existential fear every time I sat down to revise, this group and these readers have just made it such a joy. It really has changed my relationship to this process, and I look forward to it. I mean, it makes working on the weekends a total joy. So
that's fantastic. I still cannot see where to turn on closed captions. So Emily, maybe you could keep trying to figure that out. If anybody, it says look on your control panel, but I don't see it. So if anybody has a suggestion about that, maybe you could put it in the chat bar. Okay. In the meantime, let's get started on the readings because we have a lot of great stuff to listen to tonight. And also I just want to say, I think it's wonderful that you have this revision intensive Emily, because, writing and revising are two really different skills, two really different processes entirely. And sometimes they do have to be kind of separated out. So our first reader for tonight will be Madeline Zedek. She lives in the wooded hills of Cummington, Massachusetts. A longtime educator at the Botanic Garden of Smith College, she now devotes herself to writing. Currently, Madeline is at work on a memoir about her relationship with her aunt Helga, whom she never knew except through letters Helga wrote from prison in Nazi Germany. Madeline's essays have appeared in Shark Reef, the Still Point Arts Quarterly, and Dovetails, an International Journal of the Arts, among others. So welcome, Madeline.
Thank you, Dory, and thank you, Emily, for providing the space for us to share our work. I mean, I feel particularly lucky to be part of this writing community. It's really a special thing that we've got here. And I especially want to thank Emily for this revision group, which has provided the space and tools for me to really make some progress on my memoir. So it's been wonderful. And I also want to thank Emily for the submission workshop she did in March of 2020. I remember it because it was like the last thing we did before things shut down. But I had never submitted any of my work for publication. And it's really because of Emily that several of my essays have been published. And the piece I'm reading tonight, called Triumph, is an excerpt from my memoir and was published in an anthology called Being Home, which just came out recently, and I'm very excited about it. So to be in this journal. So here goes. The Holocaust is my home. As I read these words, I'm shocked. Millions of people would have been very happy if only they could have left home and left the Holocaust behind. So how is it that I can claim the Holocaust as home? I went to see the play, The Last Rat of Theresienstadt, which explores life in Terezin, a concentration camp that was located in Czechoslovakia. The Nazis used it as a model camp, a showcase to provide proof to the world that they were taking good care of the Jews and were giving them a nice home. The inhabitants didn't think of it as home, however. After the performance, during a discussion with the audience about what constitutes home, one of the puppeteers said that rather than a specific place, art was her home. As I contemplated this concept, I had the revelation about the Holocaust comprising home for me. What does home actually mean? Is it a place, a habitat, something that provides shelter and safety? Or is it a country, a community, or a state of mind? Is it where you feel most comfortable? And what is it that makes us feel at home? The dictionary defines home as a house, apartment, or other shelter that is the usual residence of a person or family, or the place in which one's domestic affections are centered. The Holocaust has been a dominating force in my life. It was the world of my childhood. My parents and their circle of friends were all Holocaust survivors. The northern Manhattan neighborhood where I grew up on the border of Washington Heights and Inwood was sometimes referred to as the Fourth Reich, or more kindly, Frankfurt on the Hudson, because of the high concentration of German Jewish refugees. Many of the shops along Nagel Avenue and Dyckman Streets could just as easily have been in Berlin or Hamburg. At the Alpine Bakery, the woman behind the counter had a visible tattooed number on the inside of her forearm. Sunday afternoons, families gathered for coffee and kuchen at Nash Bakery. The mural on the wall created an ambiance of a European cafe. I loved the custard-filled Napoleons. Sunday was also the day for strolls around the Heather Garden in Fort Tryon Park overlooking the Hudson River. It was a horticultural paradise in the midst of the city. The benches along the promenade were filled by families and friends, while young children ran around. The air was filled with the sound of German and a variety of fragrances emanating from the manicured flower beds. My mother swooned when the linden trees were blooming. That was a sense memory from her childhood home. One of my parents' friends became a professor at City College and counseled young men on how to evade the draft during the Vietnam War. He had gone to George Washington High School with Henry Kissinger and remembered how classmates had labeled Kissinger as the least likely to succeed. On Nagel Avenue, just up the block from my elementary school, was the neighborhood YM and YWHA. I attended programs there, and my father was part of a group that played a German card game called Scott. Even after my parents moved out of the neighborhood, my father returned weekly for that card game. Ruth Westheimer, you may know her simply as Dr. Ruth, was also a resident of Washington Heights. She was on the board of the Y and still is to this day. In fact, she still lives in that neighborhood. I didn't know all my parents' friends' histories, but I knew that they had left the country of their birth not by choice, and that they were the lucky ones. They had managed to hide, escape, survive, and start life anew. They had thought they were at home. They had thought they were at home in Germany, but that idea was turned on its head. Some of their friendships developed during my parents' 8 years in Shanghai, the only place that in 1939 would take in Jewish refugees with no money and without a visa. My parents were among over 20,000 Jews who found refuge there and formed a community in exile, but it was not a permanent home. The United States finally allowed them into this country in 1947. The Germans had stripped all Jews of their citizenship, so they obtained official papers saying that they were stateless, another kind of homeless. Once in New York, they started anew. Even as this refurbished life was molding itself around a new narrative, the Holocaust remained as part of the scenery. The old stories, the accented English, the pain of what was lost, and the scars, both physical and psychic, could not be eradicated from the scene. Growing up, my life was wallpapered with these unerasable details. As a child, I experienced the Holocaust as a fixture of our household, always there in the background, immovable. My Aunt Helga's absence was part of the carpet and the air, as was the absence of all those other people pictured in the photo albums that my mother had so carefully carried with her to China, then across the Pacific Ocean, and finally cross country to New York City. That included Aunt Clara, Uncle Benno, and my father's parents. Others were now scattered in France or Israel or Australia. When I hear someone speaking German, no matter where I am, I'm drawn to the voices. It's the sound of home. It was a shock when at some point I learned that not all Germans were Jewish. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I even realized my parents spoke English with an accent. In fact, I first learned that refugee English from my parents, as evidenced on a recording made when I was 5 years old. I lost my accent when I started going to school, but not my affinity for the German language. Other Jews, especially those from families not of German origin, cannot understand my fondness for German. To them, it's the language of the oppressor. When they hear it, it definitely does not make them feel at home. I grew up eating German foods, Rollmops, Bratherring, Mohnkuchen, and Rotkraut. More than food or language, however, it's the sorrow that's so familiar. My mother's grief over having lost her sister Helga. My mother didn't dwell on it, but subconsciously that pain was infused into every meal that we were having, but Helga was not. It made me very sensitive to the suffering in the world, the horrors of war, and the plight of refugees. I carried that on my shoulders as if I were Atlas. It didn't feel like a burden, it was just my life. Home was a place filled with grief, loss, and pain. Yet I didn't experience the Holocaust. I wasn't there. This is not my story. I lived through the aftermath and the rebirth after the horror. My mother was an incredible survivor. She knew she was lucky to be alive, and that was not to be taken for granted. I experienced her ability to find tremendous joy every day, her capacity to fill me with love and to live life to the fullest. On weekends, we went on country excursions. My mother packed scrumptious picnic lunches, everything homemade, gourmet even by today's standards. Jones Beach was another favorite destination. In addition to hiking, my mother loved swimming and was quite the athlete. She even learned to water ski in her 40s. I have photographic evidence of her headstands on the beach. She went skiing in Fort Tryon Park across the street from our apartment building. That park was a favorite hangout of mine. I'd made myself at home, high up in my beloved Weeping Willow. My mother was determined that Hitler would not win by robbing us of our enjoyment of all that life offers. No opportunity was to be wasted. That imperative was a lesson I learned at home. My home is filled with books about the Holocaust. I also inherited my mother's collection. I have a framed woodcut of Wrocław in 1540 that my mother bought on our post-war visit to Poland in 1967. It had been Breslau, Germany when my parents were growing up, the third largest Jewish community in Germany. When we went back to that city, it clearly no longer was home. No one speaks German, everything's Polish. My mother's apartment building was gone and many other landmarks had disappeared. The synagogue where my parents were married had been desecrated and was totally dilapidated with a dirt floor and paint peeling off the walls. The whole city still had a bombed out look to it at that time, with much rubble lying around. The city my parents knew had vanished. My mother was interested in showing me her birthplace, but she was very clear she never wanted to live there again. She had a new home. In the 1980s, I joined a group of Jewish lesbian daughters of Holocaust survivors. Here I found another home. We understood each other in ways no one else could. Our experiences required no explanation. We held retreats and explored our identities. We shared our stories, our parents' stories, and the oddities of our childhood. One woman talked about how as a kid she had a Barbie doll and a Hasbro Easy Bake Oven. She recalled playing Barbie Goes to Auschwitz. While we were all shocked, we weren't surprised. The Holocaust had become embedded in us. Now, 75 years since the Holocaust, my parents are no longer alive, and I no longer wish to live in this Holocaust home. However, I don't quite know how to get away from it. How do I find another home? It raises a lot of questions about identity. Without it, who am I? The truth is, I've made a new home for myself, far away from the urban streets where I played hopscotch. I live in rural Western Massachusetts, in the midst of forest and streams. We go cross-country skiing and hiking in the woods. On recent trips to Germany, I discovered that I now live in the landscape of my parents' youth. They had filled me with stories of their idyllic childhood. My mother described the nature group with whom she went on camping trips, how she loved jumping from stone to stone across streams, and how they skied from town to town, taking the train back. No wonder my parents loved visiting me and felt so at home here. I identify as a child of Holocaust survivors. However, that's not the sum total of my being. My background and what my parents experienced inform my life and made me who I am, but it no longer confines me. Although I will always carry my first home with me, I don't have to live there permanently. I can visit, but I can also take my leave. My parents escaped to freedom and were successful in creating a better life. They would not want me stuck in that old home. They would be thrilled to know that today I can be at home in many different places. And coming from such a horrific legacy, that's the real triumph.
Thank you, Madeleine.
Thank you.
That was gorgeous. I love all the ideas about home in that piece, and definitions. Wonderful. Make sure to type any comments or questions that you have in the chat bar so we can come back to them. Okay, our next reader is Elaine Arsenault, who's reading from her memoir, 10 Minutes at a Time, A Family's Experience with the System. Her desire to write on issues related to the criminal justice system stem from having a partner on parole and the effect that has had on their family. Her lived experience has given her insights into the traps and traumas of being Black in America while trying to move ahead. She lives in Montague, Massachusetts with her partner, Donald Perry, where she spends time writing, gardening, and sewing quilts. Welcome, Elaine.
Okay. Thank you, Dory. Thank you, everybody. It's difficult. This is such a great group. Everybody has so many great readings. And Emily's workshop really helped gel a lot of the writing that I've been working on this. When this is a piece from a bigger piece, obviously the memoir, but this is when Donald was sent to prison for something he didn't do. And so I was going to visit him, and this is what it was like. There's never a good day to go to prison, but once a week I go anyways. For the past 2.5 years, I leave work early on Thursdays, hoping to get to the prison on time. I don't tell anyone where I'm going, only saying it's personal, hoping they think I'm going to my shrink or going to AA, which isn't a bad idea, since when I leave the prison, I feel like I could use a drink. Trying to visit someone you love in prison isn't easy. First, you must find the prison, which is usually stuck in the middle of nowhere, so people think they don't exist. To get there, you must drive down Route 2 for over an hour, then take exit 28. At the end of the ramp, you turn left, then cross over a pockmarked bridge before you turn onto a narrow dirt road. When you get to the end of the road, you are shot quickly into a clearing where you will see 2 colorless cement buildings surrounded by a 20-foot fence topped with razor sharp barbed wire looming discouragingly in the distance. The visits themselves are held mostly during the day when people are working. I used to think people who had a family member in prison didn't work and were on welfare, but that's not true. Everyone I met inside works one job, if not 2. There are only 2 days for nearly 3,000 families to visit, so there's always a long line. I stand for nearly 2 hours before I reach the ticket counter, where I grab a ticket, then move to the next room. The room is small and narrow with a row of red and yellow vending machines packed with chips, soda, and candy at the front, and a wall of black lockers in the back, where for a quarter you can put personal items that you want to keep safe. I sit down on a chipped plastic chair. Babies squirm in their mother's arms. Children play on the dirty floors. The hours are long. The conversation heavy as everyone talks about time. Their time is our time, a smartly dressed woman quips. Been coming here for over 15 years, says another. When he gets out, I won't have to come here no more, a young mother confesses, then yells at her kids to sit down. I listen in disturbed silence, thinking, there is no way I could come here for 15 years, not 10, not even 5. Then I think of Dawn trapped inside. I think about how it would feel to get no visits, so I wait. After another 2 hours, a child-faced guard walks out from behind a solid steel door and calls my number. I follow her into a box-sized room, along with a Puerto Rican woman with 4 small boys. The guard turns to the young mother, points to her clothes, and says, "You can't wear that inside." I look at her clothes, then I look at mine. I don't see any difference. She has on a long sleeve shirt, black leggings, and a sweater. I start to point it out, but then I think of the hours. If I say something, I might not get through. And even though I have extra clothes in my car, if I have to go out and change, I'll have to start the process all over again. With a toddler draped across her hip, the young mother starts to argue with the young guard. Haven't seen him in months, she pleads. His kids haven't seen him in months. 5-year-old's eyes light up. Are we gonna see daddy? He asks. She shoos him away with her hand and continues to argue. I feel a rising sense of panic in my chest. If I don't get through before the next shift change, there won't be enough time to visit. As I watch the back and forth, I become angry. First with the guard for being so picky, and then with the young mother for not accepting the fact she's not getting in. I start to hate her. I glare at the young mother and think, she probably doesn't even have a job, and why would she bring her children here? I'm not sure where the thought came from, but then I recognize my mother's churchy voice in my head, her perpetual rants, the ones she has against Black people, brown people, and people who are poor. If she encountered someone with too many children or someone who appears to be struggling, she'd say something like, "Look at all them kids, God don't like welfare." The young mother begins to cry. Wet black streaks slide down her face. Light pink lip gloss puddles in the corner of her mouth. The young boy pulls at her arm. "What's wrong, Mama?" She sits the toddler on the ground. He grabs the edge of the metal detector with a tiny brown hand, tries to pull himself up. I watch him and wonder, what kind of a future does he have? I look at the streak-faced mother. I look at the 4 little boys. I think about the clothes in my car. I think about Don. I know he's waiting to see me. And if I leave now, we won't be able to see each other for at least another week. I know he'll be disappointed, but he'd be more disappointed if I didn't help. I turn my back to the guard and grab the young mother's hand. "Come with me," I tell her. "I have extra clothes in my car."
Wow. Thank you, Elaine. What a powerful piece. Wow. Our next reader, it's like an embarrassment of riches tonight, is Rebecca Rose-Langston. She has been hard at work on her first novel for several years. She's learned an enormous amount during that time about writing, though the more she learns, the more aware she is of all she still has to learn, she says. She says she's incredibly grateful for our year-long manuscript intensive, during which Rebecca wrote much of her first draft. Emily's craft workshops and revision intensive were also invaluable to her journey to become a better writer and work on her novel. Ironically, though, the book is about a mother who abandons her young children. It's taking a long time to write, in part because Rebecca hasn't wanted to sacrifice time with her own children. Now that they are 16 and 11, she has much more time to devote to writing. In her free time, Rebecca plays piano, sings, reads, plays bridge, and spends time with family and friends. So welcome, Rebecca. Good to see you.
Thank you. Before hearing those 2 pieces, I thought, well, this reading is kind of depressing, but it's positively upbeat in comparison, I think so. All right. "I won't!" my 3-year-old Ariella shrieked. "Ariella, we always go pee before we leave the house." I tried to squelch my rage as we argued yet again about the same thing. I knew she was frightened of the loud, swirling toilet, but bodily functions were a fact of life. "I'm not!" "I know you're scared." I squatted down to her level, like the parenting articles told me to. "Do you want me to keep you company and flush for you?" I reached out to give her a reassuring hug, restrained myself from glancing at my watch, and reminded myself to keep trying, even though it never worked. She slapped at my arms and broke into wordless howls. I stood up and backed away to protect myself. I tried to be empathetic like my mother had been. I wanted to console and embrace my child, but Ariella lashed out instead of accepting my comfort, screamed instead of cried, and pushed me away at every turn. Over the past 3 years, she had gradually eroded my empathy, and by this point, I had to make a concerted effort to retain the vestiges of my compassion. Was I spoiling her by trying to empathize when she acted horribly? The parenting advice was all over the map, and I no longer trusted my instincts. Deprived of human flesh, she slammed her palms repeatedly on the wall. She reminded me of a kid in my elementary school who would bash his head into the wall when he got frustrated. I remembered thinking he was like an alien, because why would someone hurt themselves on purpose? Although Ariella had always been fiery and stubborn, since she turned 3, she seemed possessed by the devil. Her tiny feet stomped around thunderously, Her scalp dripped with sweat under auburn waves, and her chubby cheeks flamed with rage. I struggled to feel the love that I was supposed to feel for my child. Looking back now, I can see my love there, like a pearl, surrounding the irritants of the day-to-day struggle. I simply couldn't see it while bombarded with tempests to which I had unknowingly committed. I retreated to the dining room and lifted the 3-month-old Hannah out of her baby seat so I could get her dressed. "We have 10 minutes before we leave for school," I called back to Ariella. "You need to pee and put on your shoes, and I need to brush your teeth." "I don't care!" She ran into the dining room, toppled her chair, and threw a toy car at me and Hannah. "Go to your room," I bellowed, "and when you come out, get ready." Losing my temper was slightly cathartic, though the psychic pressure started to build up again almost immediately. I couldn't tell yet whether Hannah would be as high-strung as her sister. She was a high-maintenance sleeper and eater, but aside from those admittedly central, time-consuming aspects of babyhood, Hannah had a more mellow temperament so far. She smiled more. She was persistent when figuring out a new toy or learning a new skill. She didn't mind being in the car, and she could even play on her own without getting upset. Despite Hannah's generally placid personality, she finally reacted to all the tension and vitriol in the house. She let out a wail and spit up all over my shirt and her sleeper. I grabbed Ariella's shoes, threw them in front of her door, and ran with Hannah down the narrow, dark hallway to her room to change her, while simultaneously stripping off my shirt. As I carefully bundled the dirty clothes so as not to get spit up on Hannah, me, or the floor, I heard Ariella kick her door ferociously. "Don't destroy the house," I yelled for the millionth time, wondering whether our house would survive their childhood. Maybe the scars on the house didn't matter anyway. I barely noticed it anymore. When Gideon and I first moved in, the rooms were empty caverns of possibility, and the gray walls begged for jubilant paint. We made what my father derisively termed a Crayola house. Each room sported a different but equally vibrant color. I was pregnant with Ariella at the time and full of conflicting emotions about the move, the baby, my life. But even in my ambivalent state, I got caught up in the excitement of creation, as if I were a 5-year-old decorating my dollhouse. We had to shell out for low VOC paint so I wouldn't poison the baby with fumes, but it was worth the expense to make the house festive. Now the walls were blackened with scuff marks from ride-on toys and decorated with splattered baby food, stains, and chipped plaster of unknown origin. I felt like I was in Star Wars, with the walls of the trash compactor closing in on me. A few minutes later, Ariella finally put on her shoes, and I placed the baby in the porta crib while I brushed Ariella's teeth. She continued to boycott the toilet, so I gave up and figured I'd ask the teachers to get her to do it at preschool. She listened to them more anyway. As silly as it sounds, I was jealous of Ariella's teachers. Unless they had kids at home, they took care of children for only 8 hours a day instead of the 24/7 slog. And they made wrangling a whole class look easy. They remained unrelentingly positive, even when one kid used another as a punching bag or jumped around maniacally during circle time. With a placid expression, they would say something like, "It looks like you're having a hard time. Remember, we need to practice calm hands and feet." Or, "Let's look at Connor's face. Do you think he looks happy or sad?" They gave me an inferiority complex. They constantly praised the children, as the parenting books and articles reminded us to do. If your child has behavior problems, catch them being good. Kids need plenty of praise to raise their self-esteem. Praise motivates children to try harder, etc., etc. I tried to remind myself to praise Ariella more, but I often forgot. And when I did catch her being good, my praise had a perversely paradoxical effect on her behavior, which would invariably tank shortly thereafter. I never truly questioned the advice. I figured I must be applying it incorrectly. Of course, most of the teachers possessed that precious commodity, sleep. Being up 3 times a night and raising 2 early risers was eroding my sanity. When I felt on the verge of a breakdown, I would ask Gideon to help out with Hannah more at night, but he insisted that he needed a good night's sleep to fight the good fight. In addition to his day job as a farm animal vet, he traveled a lot and did plenty of paperwork as an auditor for humane farm animal care. If I had to do it over again, I would somehow make him see how exhausting mothering was, and I would insist that he be more of a partner in parenting. But at the time, I thought I couldn't ask more of him, since he had 2 demanding jobs that paid the bills, while I did the invisible, unpaid, unappreciated labor of housework and childcare. Old ladies at the supermarket gushed over Ariella's luxurious hair and Hannah's big round eyes. They often implored me to cherish these days because someday my house would feel lonely and empty. But I was burdened by constant struggles and craved alone time more than anything. I couldn't imagine feeling nostalgia for the marathon of early parenthood. I didn't realize how hard semi-single parenthood would be for me. My dad had worked long hours as an investment banker, but my mom was stellar enough for 2. When I was young, I didn't understand what my dad did all day. I just knew it had to do with money. Eventually, I figured out that he made his money helping rich people get richer at the expense of everyone else. But as a child, all I knew was that he was mostly MIA. Even when he was home, he spent hours reading the Wall Street Journal, watching sports on TV, and exercising. I was an only child, and I often thought of my mom as my best friend. She always had a warm hug ready for me. She rarely lost her temper, and we enjoyed each other's company. I loved petting her short brown hair, memorizing every inch of her forearms, as if I would be asked to sketch them later, wrapping my arms around her thigh, then her waist, and finally her shoulders as I grew. Her face was my favorite face, and I never tired of seeing her love for me. It seemed to emanate from her pores. I didn't play with baby dolls when I was young, and my experience with children consisted of 2 stressful babysitting assignments and a job as a camp counselor, which I quit in a panic after only a week and a half. Yet I still thought, when it came to my own kids, that I would be like my mom, having adventures, singing and dancing with them in the living room, cherishing each day. But instead, I was a cold, tired, anxious parent who held grudges and longed for the child-free days of my past. I was crushed and shocked when I was unable to live up to my memory of my mother. Now I know there was a whole lot more to her story. And I just realized that I didn't introduce my piece to explain that the novel is about a mother who runs away to a communal farm and leaves her family. And this is the beginning of chapter 1. There's a prologue before it where she meets her future husband on a farm in college, but this is the beginning of chapter 1 after that. So I should have said that beforehand.
I'm that mom. I'm the one who runs away. Bravo.
Thank you, Rebecca. Not enough people write about how hard those early parenting years are, and you do it with such humor
And
so
honesty. I mean,
honesty.
it's really something to listen to parents and say, "Oh, it's the best thing I've ever done." It's like, come on. Once in a while, I bet it isn't.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, our last reader for tonight, but not least, is Caroline Wample, a writer, artist, musician, and a performer who lives in Montague. In a previous life, she was the co-founder and bass player of a singer for a rock funk band called Big Soul, which had a platinum record in France in the 1990s. Woo! That's impressive. She's also been an art teacher, improv theater director, and an expatriate painter in Paris. Her first essay was recently published at the Forge Literary magazine, thanks in large part to Emily's submission workshop. Emily, you have so many fans here tonight, and support from fellow writers at Writers in Progress. Caroline is currently working on a memoir about how being in a rock band led her to her true home of art. And if you want to know more about her, I am going to put her website up in the chat bar.
Thanks, Dory. Thank you all. And I didn't mention in that list of previous jobs, I was also a preschool teacher. So Rebecca pretty much nailed that in her essay. Okay, so my piece is called Play the Blues in Buffalo. It's a chapter from my memoir at the beginning. It's about our first gig that we played. I need to drink water. And the time is 1989. And the place is, as you imagine from the title, Buffalo, New York. Okay. Kelleth and Ricky and I trudged up the narrow stairs to the Pipe Dragon Club, trying not to bump each other with our instrument cases as we made the turn on each landing. With every step forward, I felt an equal force pulling me back, home to our apartment on West Ferry Street, where I would close the curtains and make popcorn and let our cat Theotis lick the nutritional yeast from the bowl, or watch a movie on Laserdisc in my pajamas and write belated New Year's cards. With its spare furnishings, its cheap foam couch that sank to the ground whenever anyone sat on it, our apartment seemed like heaven right now. And the closer we got to the top, the more desperately I wanted to be there and not here. I was on my way to play my first gig, but I felt like I was marching to my execution. Kelleth knew that booking a show was the best way to get me to practice, and I had. I'd practiced the hell out of the 10 songs in our set. But as the day got closer, the excited confidence that had been humming through my body was replaced by a cold, spidery dread. It was like the first day of school, that same terror of standing up in front of the classroom, introducing myself to a sea of new faces, desperately wanting not to be teased or look foolish in front of them. As a kid, the terror had been so enormous that I had become a clown to gain some control over it. But tonight, I couldn't ham my way through. I had to play bass. It was clear I would fail, and whoever was watching would find out I was a fraud. The other possibility, of course, was that no one would come at all. I'd read somewhere that Buffalo had lost half its population since the 1950s. Buildings lay shuttered and vacant around the city, steel mills, the hulking Wonder Bread factory. Cheap rents made it easy for venues like the Pipe Dragon Club to sprout, as it had recently in this old abandoned building downtown. But who would want to come out to such a place on a freezing night in late January? As if to answer my question, a small crowd greeted us at the top of the stairs as we entered the venue, their voices rising to be heard over a punk mixtape blaring from a boombox. The venue itself was a cavernous space that looked like it had once been an auditorium. A trash can in the corner overflowed with bottles and cans, and a strong smell of beer rose up from the floorboards. A handwritten flyer was tacked to the wall announcing, "Tonight at the Pipe Dragon, the Heretics," and in small letters at the bottom, "United Nation." That was us. Pipe Dragon, huh? More like a pipe dream, our drummer Ricky said, as we loaded our gear onto the makeshift stage of plywood panels on top of milk crates. Well, we're supposed to get 50% of the door, I said, trying to put a positive spin on things. I took my bass out of its case and started setting up, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my colorful t-shirt and baggy sweatpants. These young kids with black eyeliner and studded wristbands looked way more like rock musicians than I did. I wanted to scream out to them, "Hey, I just started playing bass 4 months ago. I don't even know the names of the strings yet." But they were busy swigging beer and smoking cigarettes. They weren't even looking at me. Oh well, they'll find out soon enough that I suck. A blue-haired kid approached my side of the stage. "Hey, are you guys United Nation?" "Yeah," I said, the blood rushing to my face. We'd settled on the name by default after meeting with a would-be manager one day at Denny's. He looked at my blonde hair and Ricky's short afro and Kelleth's Asian features and said, "You guys should call yourself United Nations or something." We dropped the S to make it sound more original, but now I worry that it just sounded stupid. But the kid gave me a big smile and raised his beer in salute. "Cool," he said, and walked away. Were we cool? I watched as Kelleth set up the PA speakers. We'd had to bring our own because there was no sound system here, and wondered if we were just suckers. Like back at New College when we ended up doing the literary magazine because everyone else had bailed. I thought of my friends who are working at banks or office jobs now, whose paychecks included the magical disposable income that allowed them to go to nice bars and restaurants. Kelleth and I lived on rice and beans and ramen like we were still students. Were we just refusing to grow up? I strapped on my bass guitar and plugged my bass into the amp. An awful electronic screech blasted out over the PA as the cord made contact with the jack. Kelleth winced at me with a face that said, "How many times have I told you not to plug your bass in when the amp is on?" "Sorry," I whispered, and turned my back to the audience so they wouldn't see me manically moving my fingers just above the strings without touching them, as if I was doing some sort of weird Reiki massage on my bass. Because I didn't know the notes yet, I'd memorized the shape of the songs visually, like dance steps or a puzzle. One day while rehearsing, I'd realized that I didn't have to look down when I played, meaning that I could sing and play at the same time. It was one of the small victories that kept me going and made me feel hopeful about getting better. Someone stopped the mixtape and the Sex Pistols were cut off in mid-scream. The show was about to start. A hush fell over the crowd and my stomach lurched as if I was about to fall off a building. Hello, stage fright, my old friend. From second grade when I played a troll under the bridge, to college when I directed an improv group, to now, it was always the same. Fluttering butterflies in my stomach that morphed into wildly flapping crows, making me want to throw up, scream, run away. The same feeling I used to get when my mother was in one of her moods and about to break all the dishes in the sink or come after me and my sister with a hairbrush. Except on stage, the disaster I was expecting never happened. On the other side of stage fright was a feeling of confident, calm, pure bliss. But first, I had to feel those cold spider fingers clamping onto every bone and muscle. Kelleth stepped up to the mic and introduced the band. "Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we are United Nation." A smattering of applause, some hoots and whistles. I have a life outside the stage, I told myself. If we totally suck, I still have that life. But I didn't believe it. This moment was why we moved to Buffalo after graduation, why we worked in crappy retail jobs, why we drove Kelleth's old diesel Rabbit instead of having 2 cars. It's why we'd spent the last weekend collecting 400 empty beer bottles from other bands at our rehearsal space and used the $27 to go out to dinner. I took a deep breath and turned to Ricky for the count off for the first song. Up until this moment, I could still imagine a way out, but now there was no turning back. In a way, it was a relief to know there was nothing to do but play. Ricky clicked his sticks together 4 times. Kelleth's guitar jangled out. Ricky and I came in on the downbeat. Kelleth started singing. Oh no, I felt like I was on a runaway train underwater. Back in our small rehearsal space, our sound had been clean, tight, solid. Here in this high ceilinged room, the notes were bouncing all over the place, flying up into the rafters. It was all I could do to hang on and not completely drop out of the song. I stepped up to the mic to sing in the chorus and felt the vitamins that I took earlier at my job at Feel Right stick in my throat. "You said you wanted to be on stage, Caroline," I thought. Well, here you are. Let's get it over with. But even though we were playing too fast, time became suspended. Thoughts had time to float under the surface of my moving fingers and torso. I remembered my musician friend Stan telling me, "Play each note as if it's your last." And as I slowed down to think even more about those words, something clicked and I could feel myself helping pull the rhythm back. Through my bass, I was sending messages to Ricky and he was doing the same through his drums. And so was Kelleth through guitar. If I cleared away my thoughts and listened to the music now in this moment, in spite of the feedback, the delay, the notes bouncing off the rafters, I could feel it getting stronger, tighter, better. Halfway through the song, I finally got up the courage to look out at the crowd, not just over their heads. There was Judy, my boss at Feel Right, Michael D. from the food co-op with his scraggly beard and goofy grin, all here to see us, to cheer us on. But more than that, they were doing exactly what we'd hoped for. They were dancing. In the 3 years that we'd known each other, Kelleth and I had had hundreds of conversations about music. We'd listened to thousands of songs together, everything from James Brown to John Lee Hooker to Talking Heads to Beatles to Run DMC. We hated the long-haired rock star culture with its smoke machines and guitar pyrotechnics, the separation between rock star and audience like the crowd was worshiping a god. We didn't want separation, we wanted connection. Kelleth had arranged my bass lines to be lean and stripped down, their sole purpose to support the rhythm. His rhythmic percussive guitar was my anchor, and our goal as musicians, our entire reason for playing music, in fact, was to get people to dance. By the end of the song, the stage fright was gone. Without even realizing it, I'd arrived at that place I'd longed to be for so many years while dancing and listening to other bands. inside the music itself. And the voice in my head that usually played on a loop telling me I wasn't good enough or smart enough or creative enough or not a real musician, that voice finally got quiet. After that, time flew. In what felt like 15 minutes, but was closer to an hour, we made it through all 10 songs, ending with an encore of Van Morrison's version of Gloria, which we hadn't rehearsed, so it came out raw and messy, but the crowd clapped and whooped anyway. As we left the stage, we were swarmed by friends and complete strangers who gave us sweaty hugs and high fives. Oh my God, you guys are so good. Is it really your first gig? I can't believe it. At the end of the night, the door person gave us our cut, $40 and a stack of 1s and 5s. Ricky got half because he'd had to schlep his drums and we kept the rest. $20 equaled 4 hours of work at my job at Feel Right. Feel Right, indeed, I felt rich. After midnight, we drove home through the dark, empty streets past boarded up storefronts that usually felt depressing, but now seemed jewel-like, full of potential, like us. When we got to our apartment, Kelleth and I lugged our PA speakers up the stairs to where Theodis was waiting. I opened a can of food for him and a can of corn for myself and ate it cold standing up while listening to messages on the answering machine. I didn't think I'd ever felt so content. I could even laugh at the message from my mother, the same one she left every week, saying that if the band doesn't work out, you can always come home and take care of the kids, meaning my younger siblings. There had been times since graduation when I'd been desperate enough to want to take her up on it, but not tonight. Kelleth and I fell asleep talking about the show. He complimented me on my bass playing and my cheeks flushed with pride in the dark. In the middle of the night, I woke to him pressing his fingers into my upper arm, practicing guitar in his sleep. I fell back asleep myself and dreamed of pentatonic scales, of Chuck Berry and Stevie Ray Vaughan, of the pipe dragon and people dancing, of music filling the room. When I woke up, it was still January in Buffalo. Dark clouds, black ice, no sun. I had one day off before I had to go back to my job at Feel Right. Our couch still sagged and there were some dishes to wash in the sink. But for the next 24 hours at least, nothing else mattered. We played our first gig. My body was still tingling. It was the best one-night stand I ever had. That's it. I have to do thank you.
Yay, that was fantastic, Carolyn. Thank you.
I hope I didn't go over time. Please tell me I didn't.
I was not keeping track and we were with you the whole way.
We loved it. Loved it.
was
Best
great.
one-night stand ever.
So fun. So if you haven't had a chance to ask questions in the chat bar, do so now. But I wonder if we can bring, yeah, there they are, bring the readers back up here. And I have a few here that people have asked. So such great readings. Thank you, you all, for your skill, not only as writers, but as readers. It's hard to give a reading that is so engaging, and you guys did such a great job, all of you. So thank you. A couple questions. So Madeleine, I was curious, you know, you've been writing this memoir for a while, and I've heard sections of it before. It's so beautiful. And it's so moving and rich. And I'm wondering if there was a specific thing that set it off in you, that if there was a moment where you knew you were going to write this book and what that inspiration was.
Well, actually, it started out as a very different book. It's in the 1980s, I worked with my mother on translating Helga's letters. And that's when I really got to know Helga in a very different way. And at the time, we tried to get that translation published, but was not able to get that done. And that was very difficult for me. And I kind of put it all away. And I thought that at some point I would come back to getting those letters published. And my mother had written kind of parts of the story, and we were trying to put it together as a book. And when my mother died, my one regret was that I hadn't done more with those letters. And I actually hadn't hadn't really thought of myself as a writer before that. And I actually joined a bereavement writing group that got me started writing. And somehow the project morphed into this, kind of my relationship with this woman. It really kind of changed after my mother died.
Wow. That's remarkable. So, I mean, the revision process is so fantastic too, right? Because you can start off writing a whole different book than the one you end up with. They say writing is in the revision, and it sounds like you really did like revision this entire project at least once. So that's fascinating. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about revision too, Rebecca, because I know I had you in my manuscript group a few years back when you were first writing your novel, and it's been through a couple drafts. Is that true? Or
I mean, parts of it have been through many drafts, parts of it have
Right.
been through a few. It's hard to say at this point. I just keep revising.
well, and it keeps getting better. Like I really noticed the changes. And somebody asked about the beginning. I think it was Emily. Your beginning has gone through a lot of different changes, right? Since I first saw it. And Emily wanted to know, what have you changed so far about the beginning since you first started?
Well, so do you mean the actual beginning or the thing I read tonight, which is close to it?
What did you mean, Emily?
I meant the thing that you read
The
tonight.
thing I read?
Okay.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I can see what paragraphs in here weren't in here originally, and I had a major case of white room syndrome in this beginning, where there was a lot of dialogue and thoughts and very little setting and action, especially very little setting. And so I mean, I have a paragraph that I just added recently, and then I have a paragraph that kind of incorporates her view of her house and her view of her setting, that was also during revision. And then also I did a lot of reading about parenthood in the course of revising this, about kind of cross-time parenthood and cross-cultural. And so a little bit of that got into here. It gets into the later parts of the book more, but there's a little bit of that kind of theme related to kind of, should you be praising your kids a lot or not? And the ways that that she talks to her kids and all the advice that she's given and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, and I mean, I added in the paragraph about her mother, that's very emotional, was also added in more recently. There's a lot of these pages were not in the draft you would have heard, Dory, actually. Probably like 2 out of 5 of them were there, maybe.
It's
So yeah, it's interesting. I feel like revision is just this weird combination of left brain and right brain. And so kind of the really analytical kind of, oh, I need to work on this aspect, but then when I'm working on it, it feels much more right brain and kind of, going with my intuition a little bit more within those kind of analytical packets.
That's a great way to describe the process. Yeah, thank you. And for those others of you who haven't addressed this question yet, Caroline and Elaine, Kate Hartford wanted to know, what do you think improved most in the process of revision? Either of you want to jump in? Oh, you're both muted.
Trying to unmute myself. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that, and I think for me, honing in on the theme, because I think there's several themes throughout, and figuring out how to thread those through. I mean, obviously, scene and dialogue and characters are something that you work on constantly. But I think really, getting that theme to make more sense. Each chapter and each scene has to include that theme, right? So then, sometimes I had a lot of writing in like my first two drafts, that it was more just a chronological piece. And then, you know, this happened, but what am I trying to say about what happened? You know, what is my basic idea? So, and it was so helpful. The thing that's so helpful about this group is, you know, having other people read their stuff and talk about their stuff really helps. You know, like Rebecca was always talking about all these ideas about how she was, you know, going through her pieces and mapping it out and everything. And that helped me kind of figure out, like, you know, it's really a process, and having to let go of, oh, you know, you just write it once and it's done. And then, you know, you do a second pass over and now it's done. And now, you know, I'm at the end of another rewrite and I'm like, I really need to go back and work on this again, which, you know, listening to these pieces, other people's pieces, is like, it gets better and better every time I hear them read. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, oh, sure. Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, when Emily was describing what the revision class was, I was trying to come up with like some kind of like a pithy, like, you know, it's like, you know, I don't know, it's like New York publishing world meets like, I don't know, the Golden Girls. That's not really right, but like it's something like, it's like cozy. It's like there's like that's a terrible example, but it's like it's like cozy and warm, but then it's like totally like all about the work and like brass tacks. Like this is, and like that's why when Elaine just talked about like seeing how it's like, it's kind of like being in other people's brains, like without like dropping acid or something, or like where you feel like you can like actually be like, oh, okay, like I'm getting to see how other people work and I'm not crazy because like I spent all day just like making, like, you know, when I heard that, Rebecca, I hope you're okay with me sharing this, that you had like a to-do list for your revision of 50 pages. I was like, oh my God, like I'm not the only one who's like, not so. So it's like really cool that, yeah, that I think for me, that was the biggest part. So in terms of my pieces, I think it's just that permission. And like for this piece, I mean, I have to say, getting it ready for this reading, like I was, you guys, folks, I was literally revising this piece at 6:30 tonight. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, I noticed some of the changes from
There were
when
a
I
couple
heard
of,
you.
well, I revised it yesterday and earlier today, but you know, you never stop revising. And
Yeah.
I think that it's really, I think that's something that a lot of people don't learn about writing. Like I saw or read this thing with Toni Morrison, and they talked about how she was on this panel much later after her career. I mean, her career, she was famous, etc. And she was looking at something she'd read, and the person who was interviewing her could tell that she was scanning the words and editing it. And it was her work that was printed and published and lauded. So I think that it's just,
She was changing it as she read.
I think we do that. And so anyway, yeah. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, that was great. Also, Caroline, while you have the stage here, I was curious about the overlap in your various art forms. By the way, if anybody hasn't looked up Caroline's website, I just peeked at it while you were reading, and your artwork is gorgeous.
Ooh, I've got a little
It's really stunning. So I wonder how these other art forms, music, art, visual art, you know, writing, how they inform each other, or whether they do, or if you see them as like totally separate processes.
That's a really good question.
I noticed in your piece there was a lot of visual, a lot of color, a lot of shape. And, you know, I also noticed the kind of musicality of the rhythm of the writing, but do you have other thoughts about that?
Well, thank you. I think that I have always done something creative. I mean, I did theater before I did music, then I did painting after I did music, then now I'm doing writing. You know, I'm really want to do stand-up comedy when I'm in my 60s. So I'm like, I think every decade just has its own iteration, but it's the same source, right? I mean, in terms of the actual projects though, I would describe it as like, it's kind of like polyamory with all these different pieces of myself. I mean, because sometimes I feel like they are jealous of each other because I do, like, I'll do one and then I don't do the other. So to answer your question, they're not always as synthesized as I would like them to be. I would like maybe them to be sometimes.
So
I'm
you're
like,
saying they all compete for your attention.
they compete for my attention. The art is a jealous mistress. And like, I guess that's why I feel like, you know, I want to do all of them, but you have to kind of just, I've had to learn how to just break it down into chunks and kind of give myself, this is my writing hat. And it's a bit like playing, you know, just moving into different roles. So I guess that's, but I do think it's helpful to think of them as all from the same source and not feel like if you're not doing one that you're not doing that. Because I do think that they can inform each other, like you said about the rhythm and the writing. I think writing is the hardest, to be honest with you. So if you're out there trying to write, it's because it's just so lonely.
It's certainly the most abstract and lonely of the art forms, right?
Yeah, and like with painting, I can listen to music. I can be talking on the phone with a friend. Like, I don't know. And with music, you can be dancing. I don't know.
Yeah, can I just chime in for a second? I was thinking that as you were reading, Caroline, how your narrator gets this moment of seeing people dancing and realizing that the connection is happening and it's working. And I was sitting here sort of solemnly thinking, well, writers don't really get that.
Yeah.
That's my point. I
We
know.
send our work out into the void and it disappears into blackness, you know, into the night.
Can I just say something? I feel like this community kind of, I don't know, not take it for granted, but I'm realizing that like I enjoy the solitude of writing, but I think that's partly because I have you guys to like go to readings and take classes, and so it doesn't feel like I'm totally alone. And I think that before I started with Writers in Progress, part of the reason why it was so hard to motivate myself was because it just felt like, what am I doing? I can't do this. And, you know, I didn't know anyone trying to, and it was very too solitary. But now I kind of enjoy the solitude of writing with those little like sprinkles of community.
You thought you were the only crazy person, and now you know that there's a lot of us out there. Right? It's good to have company.
If you talk to normal people about your writing, they're like doing normal stuff. They're like, oh, I'm doing this fundraiser and I went on a 5-mile jog and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I talk about my stuff and it just sounds like I'm the biggest weirdo. They're like, why are you doing that? So thank you all for being weirdos.
Yeah, it's so fabulous to have this community. And I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and the readers for their fantastic work and readings, and Emily for making it all happen tonight, and for your incredible groups. I just posted in the chat bar that we have our winter workshop schedule, I think pretty much online, except with the exception of a couple things, but there's so much good stuff coming this winter. I'm pretty excited about it. So take a look. One of the things I just really wanted to plug, because I think it's going to be fantastic, is Sarah Earle, who's wonderful writer, has offered to teach a manuscript, it's a generative craft workshop for writers of fiction and narrative nonfiction who want deadlines and a little bit more constructive critical feedback. So it's going to be a weekly group on Thursday nights, and she's starting it in December 2nd, I think, December 2nd. And so you'll get to write, you'll get some generative writing time. She's going to do like a craft talk each week. And then she is going to have one person each week who's turned their work in get to have a little bit of a discussion about their work and then receive written feedback from her on their pieces. And the aim is to really come out of the group with a piece, you know, whether it's ready to send out or not, maybe. But at least to have the deadline and the impetus and the feedback so that you can work on something like that. I really need that. So I asked her to teach it. I have to try to start sending out short pieces, and I know Emily's going to be doing her fantastic publishing workshop again, right, Emily? It's you guys are doing publishing, right?
Yep, I'm
Making-
teaming up with Emily Everett this time, who's the managing
Oh.
editor of The Common, and we're teaching it together.
And are you
Awesome.
gonna do another submission workshop sometime?
That's definitely a part of it. It'll be all wrapped up into that one workshop.
Okay,
Mm.
that's fantastic. And then we have a lot of other things. Jacqueline Sheehan, who's one of our resident craft experts, is doing quite a few things, and Kathy Luna is doing her memoir stuff. Michael Mercuria is doing one on language use. Sarah Browning, who is just one of the hottest shit poets I've ever met. She's fantastic. She has 2 books of poetry out. She's an incredible political poetry organizer, and fresh from her later in life MFA program, which was really cool that she did that. And she's been teaching a poetry workshop on Tuesday nights that I've heard fantastic things about. She's going to be running it a second time starting in January. So anyways, check it out. It's just, I'm so grateful that we have this forum and this community of people that we can come together and share our words and stories and ideas. And I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say something that I noticed that there are a number of people who came in late, and I wanted to let them know that they could hear the whole thing, that it's been recorded and you'll be posting it.
Yes, Emily's recording it, right? Is that true, Emily?
That is true. I'm recording it.
Okay. And we will post it on our Facebook page, Writers in Progress Facebook page. There will be a link to a recording of this event. So if you want to check it out, do so. We also post inspiring quotes there just about every day. So it's
And for those of us who are not on Facebook?
And for those of you who are not on Facebook, email us and we'll send you the link.
Okay.
Okay. Great to see you all. Have a
Thank
great
everybody.